Never burn a bridge in packaging because everyone knows each other. How did you find these accounts? He named like 3 accounts. And I was like, I'm not going to tell my secret. We would save like a tenth of a penny on something and save millions of dollars for the company. And then I go to Omaha. Literally like culture shock. So everyone's looking at me like, what is wrong with her? I'm snapping pictures of this thing in the doctor's office. So I got a patent on this. You don't seem like a salesperson. I was like,
Yeah.
I came back, people were like walking downstairs with boxes. The admin was crying and like, oh, they've started. Automatically said packaging won't be needed. Anyone can do packaging. I know everyone in packaging right now that's watching this is saying, yep, they've heard that before.
Welcome to Packaging Speaks, where we talk to packaging engineers about their lives and career growth and their vision of the future. I'm Christian, managing partner at PackStaff, and I'm joined today with Camille Corr Chism, who's a proven packaging professional and, of course, very well known in the industry. Thanks so much for joining me today, Camille.
Well, Christian, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this, and I appreciate you thinking of me.
Also, looking forward to it. I think that you've got certainly a lot of experience, but I think a lot of valuable institutional knowledge that the industry could benefit from hearing. So, if you don't mind, I think we'll get right into it.
Sure, and that's a nice way to call me old, by the way. Thank you.
Well, being nice is a big part of the game. So,
Yes.
let's. You started early on working in the food industry, Camille. How did you get started? How did you know you wanted to be in packaging? I guess talk us through the early years.
So I always loved art, and I wanted to go into art. I even had a piece of art that was displayed at a student show at the Detroit Institute of Arts. So, I was on my way to
Yeah.
art. I wanted to go to art school. My father, who was an engineer, said, who's paying for art school? So I went to Michigan State and I started taking, art and chemistry and physics and art and calculus and art and so on and so forth, thinking I'll never graduate. And along the way, I'd ask friends, hey, tell me I need an elective. Tell me of a class that you thought was fun. So someone told me about this packaging class. And I'm like, pack of what? I don't know what this is, but sure. I took it and I thought, this is so fascinating. This combines the technical and the creative. So I started looking, I went and sat down with the advisor, and the advisor went through the classes I needed, and it was like I was in the major already and didn't even know it, just by doing what made sense for me. And then years later, there's a book called Do What You Are, and it
Okay.
goes by the Myers Briggs
Yeah.
personality profile. And when I read my profile, one of the career choices that they listed was packaging design. So I'm like, wow,
You're already
that's,
doing it.
yeah, I was there. So no looking back, I love it. It's fun. It's been a great career. So once I started
Probably
taking,
the first lesson, in fact, Camille, probably the first lesson there is follow your heart and do something that interests you,
yes, yes,
right?
and he said, do what you love, and the rest will follow. That's
Right.
what it is. So I started applying for internships, and I got an internship with Kraft, and I was really happy because it was actually one of the best internships you could get. Great company, great pay, great experience, and then when I went there, I had a boss that was very, she taught me a lot, but she was very hands off. So she took me out to the plant the first week, and then she's like, next time you're going to the plant by yourself. She told me day
Awesome.
one, I consider you a full time employee.
Awesome. Uh,
And
a
it
good
was great.
internship makes a difference when you're looking for your first job. It's getting, especially those top tier employers. It's very competitive. Good internships where you get some real experience and you can put bullet points in. That's not always easy to get. The other thing I would say for students out there that might be listening is if you can get more than one internship, I would say the real standard is two right now.
That is a really great point because, okay, spoiler alert, as we go into the future, I do some work for Michigan State as well, Michigan State University.
Yep.
And we have conversations right now about the landscape for interns because there are so many opportunities. The students don't necessarily feel like it's a necessity. Even though there are enough internships for them to have two experiences to even co op, when I took it, you didn't have to have an internship to get a job,
Sure.
but to have a really good internship, you were guaranteed a really good job in your career path.
And not only a really good job, but the pay difference between somebody who's really desirable like that and somebody who, in my mind, would be a second tier candidate, it's measurable. There's real competition for those top tier folks. So you interned at Kraft.
Yes, and
That was great.
here's gonna throw in. This is something I was told early on. Never burn a bridge in packaging because everyone knows each other. Like
Too
I
small of a
say,
community.
we're all double cousins. We're all related. You talk to someone for a few minutes, and the person that was director in my department when I interned also at some point worked at Michigan State and will come back and do lectures. So we had a department meeting a couple weeks ago, and he did the presentation. And I hadn't seen I saw him a few years back, but I don't see him that often. But when I popped on the screen, he was like, "Well, hi, Camille, how are you?" And everyone's kind of looking like, "How do you know him?" So
Yeah,
that's a definite thing to know. Don't ever burn a bridge,
100%. Don't burn bridges. The community is too small. You never know when you're going to run into those people again.
and you will.
Absolutely. I almost feel like I should have your I wanted to pull up your resume for a second there. I'm not going to do that.
I have it up just on my other screen. So if you see me look up, that's what I'm
No,
doing. So,
that's a great interview tip, by the way.
yeah.
If you are interviewing for a position, definitely have your resume in front of you. You can't even tell Camille's got it out there, but that's a great move. So I guess we talked a lot about internships, college, and your start.
Mhm.
I guess let's talk about your growth a little.
So my first job out of school was with it's now called TMS, but at the time it was Persico Hobby, and
Yep.
they did packaging for McDonald's only. Now they have other clients as well, but my first assignment was to just get rid of the foam packaging for the burgers.
The foam
So
packaging, we're going way back now.
yes, yes. So uh, you know,
I called you
don't
old
let the
twice
baby
already.
face
We're
fool
not
you.
even 10 minutes in.
Yes, so it was really interesting because McDonald's back in the early 90s was light years ahead of where people are with sustainability right now. They had a
Okay.
compostable fork. It wasn't
Okay.
commercialized, but they had a fork that would break down. They were trying to do a lot with recycling and reuse the foam. And when they switched over to the paper because of consumer demand, they ended up they closed that foam recycling center. And not only was the McDonald's packaging going there, but other styrofoam products were going there. So we lost that really big stream for recycling foam. So
And
I
it really
learned a
is
lot.
recyclable.
Yeah, and I just learned a lot about volume because one of the things that was interesting about that job was we get part of my job would be to go through letters. People would send letters and they're like, I have this idea for a ketchup pack and let's um let's do this and if we would save like a tenth of a penny on something and save millions of dollars for the company because their
Right.
volume was so high and so many people were just trying to get in. They just wanted to have one little piece of the McDonald's business. So we'd
Huh.
have to go through the ideas, and before we even looked at it, we'd send a letter from legal that said, if it's your idea, it's our idea. If it's our idea, it's our idea. If it's everyone's idea, it's our idea.
It's our idea. Right.
Yeah. So I learned a lot about that. So I learned a lot about what at the time was called environmental, but it was sustainability, um, volume, the importance and the power of volume. I remember going to Pack Expo, and people tell me I look young now. So just imagine me right out of school. I
Right.
remember having to work in the store for training, and the kids were getting out of school for high school to work there, and the guy was like, "Can I have your phone number?" They thought I was a high schooler. So just imagine me going to Pack Expo looking like a high schooler and they just see Persico. A lot of people didn't know who they were at the time.
Yeah.
So I go there and people at the booth, I'm asking questions and they're like, we'll get back with you. And then someone would like tug the person by their shirt like, oh, that's Persico.
That's
And they're like,
McDonald's.
who's that? And they're like, McDonald's. And the person's like, oh, wait, come back. I'm like, no, I'll talk to you later, type
Yeah.
of thing. So I just learned the power of volume. It was very interesting. Um, and then from there, I got a call about Conagra, and I was in Chicago, like at the peak of like Chicago had all these. It was a great place to be as a young person, right? And then I go to Omaha, literally like culture shock. You would have thought moving down south versus up north was a culture shock, but in the Midwest, going from larger cities to a town was a
I
big.
spent I've spent a fair amount of my early years recruiting, trying to convince people to move to Omaha or Conagra. It was never an easy sell, but good company to work for though. Lots of opportunity for growth. It seems like they take pretty good care of their people.
Yeah, so I was impressed by the company and everything, and next thing you know, I'm in Omaha for 10 years.
10 years. You must have taken a lot out of that job.
Well, I didn't stay at ConAgra for 10 years. I worked at UPS and Lucent
Yep.
while I was there. But yeah, I mean, I got married and had twins. I'm a twin, and I had twins, so that happened in Omaha. I got a lot of good experience at ConAgra. I learned just a lot about how the grocery sector works.
Hmm.
It was already bad enough being a packaging person, going to the grocery store. We all joke that in packaging, our spouses do not like to go to the grocery store with a packaging person.
Yeah.
You know.
We don't have any engineers in my family, but obviously my dad owned Packstaff for a long time, and before that, sold vertical form fill seal equipment for the Heisen company, and we definitely. He talked about packaging every time we went to the grocery store. Oh, I sold the machine that did that. Oh,
Hmm.
Dad, nobody cares.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, it's not true. We all care now because here we are. Here I am in the industry. But thanks, Dad, if you're
Can't get
watching.
away from it.
Right.
So yeah, so I learned a lot about the grocery market, how it works. Um, just the distribution system is very different with grocery than it is, and also that was the beginning of club store packaging.
Okay.
So we had to design. It was a big deal to design a box that this people can walk out the store with it with their groceries instead of
Yeah.
bags. So that seems like second nature now, but back then that was actually a big deal. That was part
It's
of the
great. I
design.
mean, it's amazing how much technology has changed things in the last 20,
Hmm.
25 years.
Hmm.
As a proud member of what they call the Oregon Trail generation, I don't know if you've ever heard that before. Being born before cell phones, before the internet, and then having it all appear when I was a teenager. Even when I started as a recruiter, we still had a fax machine, filing cabinets with
Hmm.
resumes in them, and now it's everything I have is in my desktop and online, and it's unbelievable how much it's changed. I didn't mean to take away from you though, Camille. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's true because my first cell phone, I remember I donated $20 and it was $7 a month. And I'm like, this is for emergency use only, and it was in a bag. And it
Yeah,
had like the cord and the receiver, like a phone. And I'm like, this is so small and compact. I can put it under my seat.
yeah, it was
And it
amazing.
had like a carry case and everything. And I'm like, I'll never use a cell phone all the time. Well, next thing I know, sometimes I've had two phones that I'm carrying around.
Yeah,
So who would have imagined we'd be walking around with $1,000 pieces of glass and buying bottled water? I like if someone told me that, I'm like, go back on your spaceship and go back.
yeah, yeah. No kidding. So, along with all those changes came club packaging or club stores and club
Yes.
packs.
So and then from there, I was still in Omaha. I went to UPS,
Right.
and it was a lot of fun because with UPS, this is before they went public, and they used to buy their airplanes with cash.
Yeah.
So it was like
Awesome.
everything they did, it was about the company. So you didn't have like a fancy desk or anything like that, but you had everything you needed. They also had like the biggest database of addresses, like definitely in the country, maybe in the world. They had a huge server with that. And they had systems that, it was a green screen still, but that was high tech back then. But they could tell you at UPS on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of South Dakota or Wyoming at Joe's Tire Shop how many packages they were going to pick up and how many packages they would drop off. Almost like very, very accurate. They were very good with forecasting. So I learned a lot about forecasting, market research, industrial engineering, time studies, and all that good stuff. And then I was also helping customers with their packaging. So you had a customer, for example, they're shipping a sports drink, and the caps leak and it leaks onto someone's wedding dress. So I had to go out to the customer and kindly explain to them the importance of, changing their packaging. But then I also got into like logistics and supply chain. So at that time, we were called customer support,
Okay.
but it became worldwide logistics. Yeah, and this was the very beginning. They called it mail order, but it was really the beginning of e-commerce that I was there.
Sure.
I got to learn about the beginning of e-commerce and how it started versus mail order, how it evolved. It was very interesting. And at UPS, you do everything. So I did everything from, like I said, packaging design, industrial engineering, forecasting, running the customer counter, which is where people bring their packages at Christmas time. A little bit of everything. So it was a great experience to.
Like, oh, Christmas, we're really busy. We don't need you to engineer right now. We actually need you to come out and work this desk.
Yep, here's your brown uniform, everyone.
Yeah.
And then I was there during a strike too, so we got to help. I won't call them Santa's helpers, but they call them driver's helpers. You get the brown uniform and you're
Did you
helping
have to turn
people
that
out.
back in, or do you have a brown uniform somewhere in the closet?
Yeah. Well, and what they said was you could not wear your uniform outside of work because people trusted the UPS uniform.
Yep.
So, they could go into these private offices and labs and everywhere, and someone could rob someone. But they
Yeah.
said, no, we keep control over those uniforms. You can't go to the bar in them. Because what would it look like if someone walked out the bar in a UPS uniform, even if they get in their personal
Sure.
car? Um, and then from there, just through some connections on working on Engineers Week in Omaha, someone knew I was a packaging engineer, and they were at Lucent Technologies, and they knew that I did packaging, so they had an opening, and they reached out to me. So I ended up going. I wasn't looking, but I ended up going just because of connections by working on the E-Week, the Engineers Week committee.
Well,
So,
I mean, that's not surprising at all, frankly. A lot of folks, best way to recruit somebody is if you know them or if you can make a personal appeal from somebody in your organization. Yeah, a personal connection is definitely the best way to attract top talent. So, not
yeah.
surprising at all.
Yeah, so it was, and then I also enjoyed Lucent because you can tell I enjoyed all my jobs, but this was a process engineering job. So I was in charge of a line for the packaging area. So all the process engineers were really responsible for the entire process, whether it was the um, the the labor, not from a hiring standpoint, but just from making sure the ergonomics and everything they needed on that line worked. From a standpoint of the equipment, so I had to do some capital equipment, justifications and things like that, and then testing of the product and design of the packaging. So when I was there, I have it here. I worked on this. We made electronic wire and cable. So I have everything here, which means that my office is a mess. You can hear it. I try to pull out this cable.
Awesome. Here we go. I like show and tell.
We used to make this kind of cable.
Okay.
So this is the cable that you hook into your computer,
Yep.
or they install it in the ceiling of a building. This is actually a payout tube, so it's a dispenser. This goes into a box and it would clip in. We had these dispensers that would fit in, and when you had to take them out for any reason because maybe there's a problem with a kink or some kind of knot inside the cable reel, when they were pulling it out, because they would use this to pull it out up into the ceiling, and the installers would use it for that. So if you ever needed to take this out to get to the cable that was tangled up inside, you would rip the box open.
Okay.
So I came up with a design that you see these clips here. You pop it
Sure.
in. It was like a reverse lock, but you could reach in there and you could actually loosen that and pull this out without tearing
Without
up.
wrecking the box.
So I got in Lucid Technology was really big on patents, so they had like a whole patent group. So I got a patent on this, so that's why I have it here. But this is one of those examples of I was like at a doctor's office one day, and I see a box, and the cable's coming out of it, and I looked at it, and I said, I think that's my payout tube. And sure enough, it was. So everyone's looking at me like, what is wrong with her? I'm snapping pictures of this thing in the doctor's office. And everyone was kind of like, I don't know what she's doing. And my daughters were kind of like, here she goes again.
Well,
So
see, and that's not even at the grocery store. That's at the doctor's office.
right, right. So
It's
we
everywhere.
never rest, right? So there I learned a lot about, process engineering. I learned a lot about, creating a patent. I'd done some patent research as an intern at Kraft, but to actually go through the whole process of creating a patent, that I hadn't done. And then they also implemented SAP. So they took the engineers off their jobs and they had us do data collection
Hmm.
for 6 weeks. I got the night shift. I don't do well without sleep. So that was fun.
I don't.
So
Most people don't.
yeah, I really didn't. So and then I would, I'm up all night. I leave at 8, and I would drive home eastbound, which meant that by the time I got home, the sunshine woke me up. So it was interesting. But this is an example of packaging, right? How people don't recognize the importance of packaging until it's not there.
Hmm.
So when they decided to pull the engineers, they told me later one of the reasons why they did it like that was they wanted to see which functions were really needed. And they automatically said packaging won't be needed. Anyone can do packaging. I know everyone in packaging right now that's watching this is saying, yep, they've heard that before. So they
Yeah.
told me that later, but they said within a couple days, they left a couple people on the day shift. And they said, we can cover everything, but there's one area we can't understand. We don't know what it is packaging. So it ended up being another engineer reporting to me, a retired person engineer from another process that retired, but they brought him back as a consultant working in packaging, and I had an intern. So we ended up having a team after that because they realized the importance of packaging. Um, they did a lot with technology. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. I was at, like I said, I had no idea. I wasn't planning to leave. I love what I was doing at UPS, but we went to tour the technology that Lucent had, their scanning technology in the plant. And when we walked in, I was like, wow, I could work here. I don't know what made me say that. And sure enough, like 4 years later, here I'm at Lucent. So you just never know how it ends up. But, again, connections and just keeping your options open and just learning as much as you can at every turn. Um, so they implement SAP and the stock went from like 85 bucks or 100 bucks or something like that to like 10 or 20 bucks very
Gosh.
quickly. So, and then we were spun off to Avaya. We became Avaya, and that was kind of like the beginning of outsourcing the processes. And I left before they did that, but you kind of see it was happening. So I ended up getting a job. I moved from Omaha to Texas to work for what was at the time Compaq. You're probably going to start noting a trend. So I was at Avaya, which became Lucent, and I mean Lucent, which became Avaya. Then I was at Compaq, which became Hewlett Packard.
Right.
So I learned about computer packaging, the importance of specs. I did specs at, for the food companies, but the specs were really important at Compaq because they shipped a lot overseas. And
Okay.
even back then, 25 years ago, we had to track the materials. What you hear now, like EPR, responsibility, and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But we were doing it 25 years ago for Europe. Depending on who you talk to, depending on how they define it, now I'm hearing, fee, tariff, tax, levy, you're hearing all these different terms. But that's basically what it is. Certain industries have been paying that to Europe for decades.
Interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, and that's why the specs were so important. But we were using the spec system for the parts, which meant, and I've seen this multiple times in my career. You're putting in the specs. It would be like using the nomenclature or the units for a car when you build a house or you design a building.
Yeah.
So, totally different nomenclature. So, for the corrugated box, for example, we have the flutes and it's like A, B, C, D. But when
Right.
you put it into the system for the part, they're asking for the thickness.
Okay.
So, we know that the thickness of a flute is whatever it is, will be, but we don't name that. And when the, quality people go and they do their verification of the product, they many times will just like reject the corrugated because they're like, this is out of spec. The thickness is all over the place. The thickness is above the minimum. And like, of course it is. It's wood and it's a fluted box. We know that because of the flute, but that's one of the things I learned in the using the spec system for the part when it's not specific to the packaging.
Mm. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. So I was at HP. I worked on servers. Well, I forgot to mention this. So when I first got there, they used to ship a server out. They would ship the cabinet, which kind of reminds you of a refrigerator as far as the height and the size of it. But they would ship it empty, and then they'd ship maybe 40, 50 boxes, maybe 20 to 50 boxes easily. And it would include any keyboards, any of the, oddly enough, cable management, right? All the different parts, and then you'd have to open the box, and the person would have to assemble it in the data center. So they were just starting to do this because Dell did this already. All the parts in those boxes were put into the server. So when they received the server at the data center, it was already set up, and they could
Okay.
basically plug and play.
Yeah.
So Compaq was just getting into this business, but they didn't have a way to test it. So I had to design a test sequence in the test lab that could be repeatable, that would actually represent what the hazards were. The one hazard was tipping. You couldn't tip these servers more than say 15 degrees without damaging certain components. Another part thing was going over the bump for a freight elevator, so you get this gap from the freight elevator to the floor, and then a lot of times you had an incline. So I had to, set that up, simulate it enough to say this would actually represent it. So there was some, research, but walking through areas, going to like the shipping, looking at the shipping areas, and then also what do the data centers look like? Because there's
Right.
usually a ramp into the data centers as well. So I had to really take all that into account. And when I didn't mention that early on, I learned, starting with my internship, you have to get out there and see how things work. You don't just stand back and watch. You have to actually ask questions, look at it. And sometimes when you have problems on a high speed line, they have to slow the line down to fix it. You learn so much when things go wrong. You learn a lot. So between that and like when I worked for um, Persico, I had to ride with a driver to a distribution center. I had to work in the restaurant for like a week or two or something like that. But just to get in there, just to see how the business was run. Same thing with UPS. Delivering packages, working at the customer counter. It really
Right.
helps you understand how the packaging is used and what the requirements actually are.
Yeah.
So that helped me when I was designing that. I'll just call it an obstacle course for servers. So that was a lot of fun to do that. And from what I understand, it is a standard now that they use. They still
Good.
use. So then my next job. So when I went to HP, then it became HP, and
Right.
then they started laying people off. And when they hired me, I was in a group of about 100 people. And then when they hired me, they put on a hiring freeze, and they never opened it back up. And then one of my coworkers happily bounced down the hall. He said, "I'm going to art school." Oh, why is that? Well, I decided to go to art school, and I told my boss, and he said, "Well, wait until blah 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 because maybe you need a package." And I was like, "Oh," so I knew exactly what that meant.
Yeah.
I like knew to the day when the layoffs were coming, and people were walking up to me and saying things like, "Oh, you're a black female. You can get a job anywhere." And I'm like, "Okay."
It's
Like you're
awful.
married, your husband fake, like so it
People
was just
say stuff like that, huh?
yeah, they do. But I was like, okay, well now I know to look for another job. I knew I was like, I better go get my teeth cleaned. literally, I was kind of joking, but I got my teeth cleaned, and when I came back, people were like walking downstairs with boxes. The admin was crying, and I'm like, oh, they've started. So go to my office, and someone comes to my office, and they just got promoted because they laid off the director. So the new director's first job was to lay everybody off, and he was such a nice guy. I felt he was just like, he was very, like he felt very bad. And I said, look, look, I already knew. And then he started looking around, and everything on my desk was cleaned up. And he was like, how did you know? And I'm like, 100 people, I was last one hired. You know, doesn't
Right.
give you much of a chance there, right? But then they came around and they said, hold on, don't leave, don't leave. And then my manager came by and he's like, oh, well, we're gonna have you work, as a through a consulting company. And I was like, well, sorry, but I already have a job. And they just told me to let me know when I can start, but I already have a job. So, I moved on from there. Um, but it was good to know that they still wanted me, that it wasn't like,
Yeah.
good riddance, sayonara type of thing. It was,
Right.
we really want to keep you in this other way. But then from there, I started doing sales. Um, I was working for a company that they do fabricated foam, and it was okay. I'm gonna pull out one of my little props here. This is my
Where are we now? We're in like 2006 or something like that.
we're like 2003.
Okay.
Close. So so this is fabricated foam, right? You can cut it to size,
Yep.
nice and soft and springy, right? So I was doing sales for them, and ran their warehouse, their satellite warehouse in Houston, and that kind of thing. So I started working with the sales force at UPS, and that's when I realized, when you worked in engineering, ask people, what time is it? They literally tell you how the watch is built, the movement of it. But with the sales teams, you go to sales meetings and you got like your watch. Oh, I went on a trip and I met this person, but well, yeah, they have like a human type story to go
Right.
with it. And I go, wow, there's like a different way to think, like people oriented. So I got this job in working, selling fabricated foam, but also still supporting HP. And it was really interesting because I kind of leveraged people that I knew in the area, and I found some really good accounts. And even the company that was my competitor, after we kind of we had a good relationship because they sold also the compact. But
Okay.
I kind of distanced myself since I was selling against them. And when I left that company, the first thing he did when I talked to him, he said, "How did you find these accounts?" He named like 3 accounts, and I was like, "I'm not going to tell my secret," but it was just because knowing people and you
Yeah.
know that kind of thing. So, and then from there, I sold boxes for Warehouser.
Okay.
So I went
Was sales
there.
was sales a conscious choice?
So it wasn't conscious, but I liked it. So when I got the chance to work, when I left HP and I got the chance to work in sales and engineering support and warehousing, that kind of thing, then I really did like it. So then I started looking at sales jobs, and I was still in Texas, so I was still tied in with companies there. So the
Hmm.
sales, it was pretty easy at that point because I knew a good amount of people. And for me,
Right.
that job I would just describe as having lunch with my friends every day. you know. And whenever someone would say, "You don't seem like a salesperson," I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get the sale.
You didn't even realize you bought all that stuff, did you?
Right. So it was nice because I people would say things like, "You didn't have to tell me that," because I would talk to them about like their, I'm selling boxes, but I go to a plant where they're bottler and their bottles were leaking, and I was like, "You should check the torque on your line." They're like, "You didn't have to tell us that. Why did you?" I'm like, "Well, because you're spilling material all over the floor. You're wasting money. Why wouldn't I
You
tell
hope
you
it's good,
if
right?
you know if it's something you can look at?"
Yeah.
So just I just it was myself and trying to be helpful to people, and they appreciated it. Um, and then from there, I'm just driving one day, going to sales call, and I get this call from someone to this day, I don't know his name. He was in another state, and he's like, "You're moving to Dallas, and you're like the highest salesperson in the state." No one told me that. This is how I found it out. And they were moving me and my boss. So I'm like, I'm not moving to Dallas. And oddly enough, I had interviewed with a company in Michigan, greenfield plant, and they were like doing all these, behavioral analysis, personality test, all this stuff to kind of, you know, they wanted to bring people in that didn't have automotive experience to build a brand new type of automotive manufacturing company.
Okay.
So, but the process took forever. So it took about a year for them to make me an offer, and I'd already started working at Warehouser. And I said, well, I already started a job. Ethically, I really don't want to take another job. But then when I got the call telling me they were going to move me to another state, so and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's not going to work. So I called them back and like, hey, is that job still open? And it sure was. So that's how I ended up moving into automotive.
That's an unusual progression to go from food and heavily consumer driven development and then into sales and then into automotive. Usually, when I'm talking to people in automotive, they're saying, I want to go someplace that's faster, I want to go someplace that's more consumer driven. Um, but you did the opposite. So,
Yeah, I did because for me it was kind of I wanted to move back to Michigan.
heard that story a million times.
Yeah, it was a geographical choice. And also, I mentioned that my dad consulted. So I always wanted to kind of have my own business, you know.
Yeah.
So I knew that the more you know, the more you can help people, right?
For
So
sure.
I took that as, be open, don't get stuck. When I worked in food, everyone stayed in food. When I worked in computers, everyone, they moved around to like the three big companies
Right.
that did whatever that was. So I'm like, well, I'm going to move from industry to industry when I can. You know, to me, like doing something you've never done before is scary, but at the same time, that's where you learn the most.
Yes.
You
Either
know,
trying new things or through failure.
yes,
I think are the two biggest ways to, right?
or both.
Yeah. Or
So,
both.
and I try not to look at failure as failure. I always look at it as learning. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So
yes,
automotive, that was 5 years or so.
I started off in 20 years ago in automotive.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
first
20 years
company,
ago is right.
yeah, so the first company was like a greenfield plant. I told you they were looking at a brand new type of automotive company. It was a joint venture between multiple companies. So it was like US, Germany, Korea, Japan. It was like very like multinational, right? And so many times, I meet people and they're like, I'm so sorry, I don't speak your language very well. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I can't say I don't speak your language well in your language.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
Well, welcome to the USA. We don't speak your language well. Sorry.
yeah. And I always say, well, how many languages do you speak? And they're like, oh, I only speak two fluently or three fluently, but I know a couple more, but not that well. I'm like, I kind of know English. That's about it. You know?
Right.
So it's just interesting to see that different perspective.
Hmm.
Um, but so I learned a lot just about at that point just about different cultures, how they work, the difference in products and difference in production. We learned about lean manufacturing. In fact, we couldn't start our job for an entire month because we went through a whole suite of lean manufacturing training,
Wow.
kaizens and everything, the Toyota, TPS, all that kind of stuff. Um, and they made engines. So we had groups. They broke us into groups in our training sessions. We as a group had to tear down an engine and build it back up. So this is an example with packaging. If you're a nosy person, if you like to know how things work, if you like to know how things, you get to do it. Who could say I built an engine when I worked at back to Persico when I worked there and I had to ride with the driver. He was like, "Can you drive a stick?" And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "You want to drive the truck?" I'm like, "Yes, but no." When I was at UPS, I rode with the guys that do these short plane trips to deliver packages. I go
Hmm.
from Nebraska to North Dakota with him one day, like November, and it's below zero. I'm like, "Ooh," but we're on a plane, and I'm in the jump seat, and he's like, "You want to fly the plane?" And I was like, "Yes, but don't," because I was like, looking
Straight
back,
yes. Yes, I want to
yeah,
do that.
I was kind of like, yeah, I probably should, but if I wrecked the plane, my dad would talk about me. You
Yeah.
know, that's what I was thinking. So, you just have the opportunities to just do things and see things that you never would have imagined or thought about. Just all these cool experiences. And I would say to people that are just starting, don't say yes but no. Just do it. If someone says you want to fly a plane, do it just because you
Heck
can.
yeah.
You know.
Heck yeah.
So then I go to Johnson Controls. They make seats for automotive, and so I want to take car seats, but not the baby car seats, but the seats that you sit in when you're driving. And then they became Adient, so now they're Adient. But that I learned in automotive in general. I learned about returnable packaging.
Sure.
Thus, my little. But yeah, so I learned so much about returnable packaging. Automotive's like a totally different world, and
Right.
people say they want to move out of it because it's not glamorous, but really none of it's really glamorous. Really, when you get into the nuts and bolts of it. So to me, it's
Other than
probably
seeing it on the shelf, right?
right. But even
But if your
then,
friends saying, "I did that package," that's a little glamorous.
yeah, I'd say probably the biggest awe I ever had was when during the pandemic we were doing these um, virtual happy hours. If we get
Hmm.
on, introduce ourselves, and someone gets on and she said, "I invented microwave popcorn," and we were all like, "Oh, wow, you're a star!" She was just like,
Yeah.
"It's just popcorn," but so yeah, so every once in a while, I am starstruck by someone in packaging. Definitely, that was one. So yeah, it's been very interesting learning about the lean manufacturing. The returnable situation is so different because you're not just buying a package and getting rid of it, recycling it, or baling it, or throwing it away, or whatever you do. You have to have a really good idea of the supply chain, precision on usage, how these are handled. You also have to have really good housekeeping in your plant because people, if you walk to the plant, someone's sitting on these, or this is someone's workbench type of thing, they turn upside down, or people actually will take, this is one of my favorites because it's got a door on it. But
Okay.
people will take the big ones, the actual size ones home, and they will make like little like tents and forts for their kids. So you have to have a really good idea of, keep track of it, have a system, have a process, and because these things,
Yeah.
people say they
Because they're
grow
really
legs.
expensive and you need them back, right? I mean,
Yeah. So you don't want them to grow legs and walk away.
no.
Yeah. So that was,
Serialized packaging. You got to like really keep track of it.
yes. Yes. So I learned a lot about RFID tracking and
Yeah.
systems and the whole, even with um, returnable containers, they have theft rings. And like organized crime gets involved and all that kind of thing. You think, well, is there that much money in those? Yeah, either resale or just the scrap material.
Okay.
It's just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, I just learned a lot about, how the systems tie in with returnable packaging, and even to the point where now that I consult, jump forward a little bit, part of my work, I've developed an app that can calculate your returnables versus your expendables. So you do it right then. So let's say that a lot of times you have to do a cost justification for this stuff in front of a director or VP to get
Hmm.
justification, get them to sign off on it. And you give them the scenario with the volumes and everything, and then they'll say, "Oh, what if we like increase the volume by 30%? Or what if the volume increases by 62%? Well, you know what? Let me calculate that, and I'll get back with you in 4 days or whatever." And
Right.
then in 4 days, well, I'm gone. I've got
Yeah.
a meeting, so
Other
it's
things
a
are
month
happening.
before. Yeah, but now they can actually, with this software, they can actually go, "Oh, let me plug that in right there, right in front of you, boom," and have the answer, and they can compare the two side by side.
Hmm.
So the people that are decision makers can see it right away, sign off on it.
And that's an app?
Yes.
You said?
Like it works now, but I'm working right now on having a database for it. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I've been working with Techtown in Detroit on it, and they do a lot of B2C, like business to consumer apps. So, which doesn't necessarily require a database, but I'm one of the few people that's doing like B2B, and it was kind of telling them, well, you have different set of requirements for businesses, You're
Yeah.
not going to have an app for, I don't know, we'll just say a T-shirt, and people get it, and there might be some glitches, but they still get their T-shirt. You can't afford glitches in automotive packaging
Right.
because a glitch could mean a helicopter landing on someone's roof in 4 hours, right?
Okay.
So, so yeah, that's it's been a lot of fun. But through all that, like I said, I mentioned before, I always knew I wanted to consult, and I would make this list of things that I had to have done before I could consult. And I tell you, I love what I do. I've always have loved the packaging work in the world. Um, and my father used to say, the work's not hard, it's the people.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a couple times where I'm like, oh, this is the worst, right? And then someone would maybe offer me a job, reach out to me. I'm not looking. They offer me a job, and I go there. And then next thing I know, I'm like, no, this is the worst because there are things they didn't tell me. And every time that would happen, I would like pull my little list out and I'd cross off a couple things. And finally got to the point where I crossed off the last thing. It would just be things like the type of experience I needed, um, what my debt ratio needs to be, maybe, geographically where I want to be, that kind of thing. Just different
Sure.
things that were, the industries, the contacts in the industries that I think I need to have, the experience I need to have, and like I crossed the last thing off, and I'm like, it's time to do it. And I had already been consulting part time. I had someone that I knew that knew I did packaging. We lived in the same dorm. That's how we met. And we kept in touch over the years. And they said, hey, we need some help with packaging. Would you mind helping? So I took a week of vacation off, and I went
Okay.
there, surveyed everything, had meetings, figured out what was needed, and I would do the work on the weekends and at night. Then I needed, and they were in a different time zone, so I could meet with them. Well, they
Mm-hmm.
were still at work, but I was already off work. So that was part of my criteria. If I was going to do anything part time, it was not going to interfere with my work,
Good.
at all. So, and it was, at that point, I, made a point to learn as much as I could about packaging in different fields. So it was,
I mean, you had food. You've got some club pack. You've got some supplier experience, some sales experience. Now into automotive. Nice robust network, and you're just like, okay, I've had enough of jobs not turning out what they want to be. I've had enough of not having as much control as I want. I've been thinking about starting my own business for a while, and now's the time.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
and it's just
Yeah,
you, right?
just me, yes.
That's still
So
today.
I took the leap. Yeah, I took the leap. And then
Um,
the pandemic hit.
okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. Was that? Is that the biggest struggle you've had in Indigo packaging thus far? It was through COVID.
Um, well, as part of my list of requirements, I had to have like enough set aside because you always hear it takes a couple years to get a business off the ground.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I have to be able to live a couple years if there's no income.
Okay. So you
So
had money saved up. Good for you.
yeah, so that worked out pretty well. So my friends have always called me cheapskate, but they're not laughing at me now. So they're like, okay, we see you now. We see what you're doing. So that really made. I mean, the pandemic obviously wasn't easy, but at least I was kind of like, okay, can I can handle this. This isn't the 2 years that I expected for the business to take off, but you know who knew what the reason would be because I actually started. I had a really good contract right before the pandemic. Things seemed to be going really well, and then I'm flying back on a Friday, and the state shut down at the
Mm.
beginning of the pandemic, where they started
Yeah.
shutting things down. So there you go. But it like I said, I was able to. So I did a couple things. I was able to like get my Six Sigma my lean green belt and black belt.
During that
Um,
time.
yes, and I also was
Okay.
studying for my PMP, and I
Yep.
thought, well, it'd be great to have my PMP. But since the pandemic hit, we were the first people to go virtual. So they didn't really have a good, in my opinion, a good system on how it was going to be virtually. So they didn't really tell you. So, all you heard was that when you take the PMP test, you can take a sheet of paper and a pen, and it has to be blank. But when you get in there, you can write down everything you memorize, your formulas, the processes, all that stuff. You can data dump it, and then you can refer to it. And they're like, you can't have any of that. So then I'm like, okay, it's phase one, blah, blah, blah. And I'm talking like that, and they're like, you can't talk. They're like, you could be talking to someone. And when they're like, you can't talk. So after that, I thought, okay, I'm done. So I just kind of wrapped it up, and obviously I didn't pass it. And I'm
No
not used to
PMP. No PMP for Camille.
Yeah, so that would be an example of failure. But I, learned in automotive. I learned a lot about PMP. I think it started when I was at Lucent. We did some project management, but I did a lot with project management in automotive because that's what they use, and packaging always would get left out.
Yeah.
So they put the money in for packaging, but they knew the packaging money wouldn't get used. So at the end, other people would say, "Hey, there's that pot of money. No one's used it yet," and they would take it. And when it was time for you to have money, you wouldn't have money. So, and then they would, you get in these meetings, the project meetings, and they would say things like, oh, well, packaging not done, because they say like at phase two, you're supposed to have all your packaging done, but the suppliers weren't even sourced. So how do you even know who you're going to be working with on the packaging? You don't. But that was like a smoke screen because everyone knew blame it on packaging. I know people in packaging are not going to say they've ever heard this, but blame it on packaging. It's packaging's fault. So then the program meetings would end up being like circling around the
Yeah.
packaging team saying you
You
don't have.
think it's still that way? I feel like packaging's been kind of coming out into the light and is involved much more from the beginning these days.
You are absolutely right. During the pandemic, I saw Forbes magazine had an article, I think it was 2021, the year of the package. After I gained consciousness after fainting out of surprise, um, I read it. It was pretty interesting, but it was, things that we're all like in packaging. Yeah, we already do that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Finally, right? Our
Yeah.
day's here. And I did mention that part with consulting, I also work for Michigan State, so I'll get into that a
Hmm.
little bit later. But um, we are seeing an uptick in people getting into packaging, and they are working
Excellent.
on a plan to double the size of the packaging building.
I think I just read about that. In fact, they've secured a pretty major donor, haven't they?
Yes, there are a lot of companies that were willing and happy to donate because they get the interns and they hires from Michigan State.
Right.
So there's been a lot of support for sure. Whole
Awesome.
lot of support.
Awesome. So, how's the business going right now? Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Are there specific clients or types of business you're looking to connect with to talk packaging these days? What's
So
next?
yeah, so I've focused on automotive. I mean, I can do industrial. I also for Tech Town, I'm an expert. They have an Ask an Expert program, or small companies can go and they can reach out and have like a consultation with you, and I'm the one for packaging.
Hmm.
And they have all these kind of interesting ideas. There was one person, they were doing like a spice rub, and they wanted the packaging to be shaped like they were, whatever the spice belonged to. So let's say a pork chop, or a piece of chicken or steak.
Uh huh.
And I'm like, yeah, that's really neat, really interesting. Here's what your tooling's gonna look like from a cost standpoint. And they were like, oh well, we'll just buy stock bottles. But just to see some of the creativity and things that people want and like. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they had a generic bottle, but then they have like a customized part on the bottle. And but their volumes are small. They're like, I don't know how to do this. And I said, well, look into 3D printing.
Hmm.
So then I referred them to some people that do 3D printing. So we'll see how that works out. So that's really interesting to be able to, consult with the small companies, and I'm doing it through
Right.
TechTown. So, you know, it's pro bono for that, because a lot of the small companies they don't have the money yet to actually pay for packaging. And then the automotive, that's a lot of fun. I'd say you asked me the biggest challenge, and it's not, just being an entrepreneur. It's the looking young, not fitting the mold of what a packaging engineer normally looks like. And people second guessing and questioning me. One of my favorite questions is, why do you need to know the size of the part?
How do you build a package for it if you don't know how big it is?
Well, that's when I know that, for whatever reason, that I probably don't fit the mold of what they
Yeah.
expect. So, then I have to be more creative about getting that information. Whether it's me just popping up at a plant somewhere, surprise, I'm here, how are you? And getting the information I need that way. Then, that's what I do. And then you were asking about the business. So, one of the things, when I looked at consulting, I learned working corporate that election years are always slow, right? Everyone's focused on election. Everyone's like, let's just wait and see. So nothing much happened. So I'm at Pack Expo, and people are, we were all kind of like, yeah, things are definitely slow right now. So, I
This
mean, I'm
last cycle.
getting, yeah, the cycle. So but things are, I would say things are a little bit different right now because we're kind of doing a lot of remake of the country, right? So, I'm definitely after the election. I'm getting people reaching out with inquiries and things like that, but people are still kind of like, yeah, let's just wait a couple more months. Let's just see. Let's just kind of,
I've definitely
still.
got some of that. A lot of my projects have been put on, we're going to put this on a 3 month freeze, kind of
Hmm.
see how everything settles out, what's going to be the
Hmm.
tariff situation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people are very, I would say they're very positive. They're very upbeat about it, but it's definitely let's wait a few months. I was at a supply chain conference this week, but I was the only one speaking about packaging, and everyone else was speaking about supply chain, technology, tariffs, tariffs, and tariffs. You know,
Hmm.
so there was a lot of discussion on tariffs. So when I got up to do mine, I said, "Yeah, so I'm gonna try not to say the word tariffs." But I said it once, and everyone kind of laughed. But yeah, so but I would say most people are optimistic, but just cautious optimism, and a lot of things are being pushed back.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Before I let you go, I mean, we've taken more than an hour of your time today, and I think you've got a great story to tell. What is there anything you would tell kids that are coming out of school right now or will be in the next few years how they can prepare themselves for success in this industry that's changing quickly?
Yes, and I'll just tell you, so I mentioned Michigan State a couple times. So I
Yeah.
have two roles at Michigan State. One is I teach automotive packaging, so that's what these props are for. And then I'm also outreach. So I'm based in the metro area about an hour from the school, and the largest feeder school, in fact, my high school, Cass Tech. Hey, everybody. This is from Cass on this call. There's going to be somebody. But it was the largest feeder school into Michigan State, the entire university last, coming in, you know, freshmen, the freshmen for
Yeah.
this year. So why not, dig into this huge STEM base of people because of automotive and engineering. Like everyone's in engineering in Detroit. I just thought that was normal. I'm like, oh, you're an engineer. Oh, great. Like all my friends, my female friends were all engineers. We sit and talk about, automotive parts and things together. Like we're just over coffee type of thing. But so there's just a really strong STEM base. And so my first piece of advice would be math is really important. Math is not scary. We use math every day. We use math in music. We use math everywhere. People have kind of gotten used to like Chat GPT and their calculators on their phones, but it is important to understand where those calculations are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Because I see that there are things that maybe would be we considered foundational because we had to do it. So like I was the last class to take mechanical drawing by hand. The next semester they taught it with CAD. So yeah, right. I'm really getting. I'm seeing more and more gray hairs now, right? So we had to draw by hand, which meant that you had to understand the concepts while you're drawing it this way, all the different elevations, where you see, how you dimension it, that kind of thing. Um, I would say make sure we know just because it's not required. For example, just because cursive is not required doesn't mean that you don't have to learn cursive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is a little off base right now, but I did jury duty last year, and I was sitting I didn't realize I was even sitting near this vending machine until people kept walking up to the vending machine and they put their money in and they get their food, and then the change would drop down and they'd walk away. And there's someone clearly that was sitting near closer to the vending machine than me, and they were abused. They were like, "You left your change," and people were like, "What?" Or, "I don't need that." And we were all like, oh, look, all the old people were like, "What? Like, how do you not? You're throwing money away." So that would be it. Learn math, don't throw money away. Just because it's something that was done in the past doesn't mean that it's not important or it's not useful. Old does not mean worse. Older does not mean obsolete. It maybe is foundational. So understand what's foundational in packaging and
Mm-hmm.
what maybe is obsolete. But don't just assume everything's obsolete. And don't assume, oh, here's the other thing. Don't assume that Chat GPT or AI, anything, is the end all be all.
Absolutely. We are actually slowly dabbling into bringing AI into PackStaff. I've got an AI note taker
Mm-hmm.
now, integrated into our database and all of this stuff. And I there's an option where you can set it up where it automatically saves information in the database, or
Mm-hmm.
you can set it up so that you have to review it and approve it first. And I'm thinking to myself, who trusts AI enough that they would just let it go right into the database without reviewing it first? Um, but I'm a little worried that there's a good chunk of the population that does that.
Yeah, there are people that I've seen people that do that. Just because it says it doesn't mean it's right. Because I've done things just to see, and I like put in some calculations I done on a spreadsheet, and I'm like trying to figure out something's off. It's off by like a few pennies, but I couldn't figure out why. And when I put it into one of the AI systems, it messed it up even more. So yeah, it's not the end all be all. And learn how to write. Communication is very important, and it's not communicating like if you communicate in your way that doesn't. It might be creative, but communication is nothing if people don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, if they don't understand, you're not actually communicating.
Yes.
Yeah,
So those are some of the things. Those are my little pieces of wisdom, and never stop asking questions.
right.
Um,
Good stuff.
yeah.
Okay. Camille, I really appreciate you giving us so much of your time, sharing your story with the community. I think it's a good one, a valuable one, and I look forward, obviously, to continuing our relationship and talking on a fairly regular basis, and hopefully we can meet face to face again. Next Pack Expo's right around the corner, right? They're never end, it seems like. So.
Yeah, always. So, yeah, we'll definitely get to meet in 3D finally.
You got
And
it.
thanks for having me. I always just love just having a conversation about packaging with people.
For sure. Okay.
And I hope
Thanks so
everyone
much.
that gets to watch this enjoys this.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, packaging engineers. The next one will be out soon.